Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And of course, I'm reading Folklore to you on St. Patrick's Day, which is a bit of a minor holiday. Some people might have heard of it. That is a joke, of course. If you are watching this live, you should know that the chat, there's a live chat, and it's already growing a little crop of potatoes who are already wishing each other happy St. Patrick's Day. But if you're not watching this live, down in the description below, there will be timestamps, and those timestamps will take you to the various stories we are reading tonight. And what we're reading tonight is we're reading stories about St. Patrick. I'll say a bit more on this in a second, but let me just say hello to my folks in the chat. Hello, Uncle Kitty. Good to see you. Hello, GS. I see Tammy is not feeling well. Has strep throat. Oh, I got strep throat story. But I'm not going to tell it right now. The miserable thing to have. I'm sorry to hear your immune system is struggling. All right. One of the great tragedies of my life is that I'm a celiac. Most beers I can't drink, but in particular, Guinness is malted. And that, well, you can malt a lot of grains. It almost always is like barley, which unfortunately means that it contains a whole bunch of gluten. Which is a shame, because Guinness is pretty hard to replace. Even if you're not just drinking it, putting it in stews and stuff. It's really good. Oh well. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about St. Patrick's before we get to, or St. Patrick, rather, as he is known when he's not a day. Before we get to the stories. So if you're new to Folklore, if this isn't really like a space you've spent a lot of time in, or if all you know of it is sort of like Grimm Brothers, morality tale kind of stuff. A lot of folklore does exist around basically every saint, that especially ones that had any kind of national importance. So, you know, St. Patrick has a pretty significant role in sort of nationalist iconography for Irish identities. And we also saw a bit of that with his name has left my head, but the Icelandic one who supposedly went to the Devil's School and so on, but he was also a real figure from that era. So basically the idea that a saint can do spectacular things is not really a new or unique concept for folklore. I think if you're unfamiliar with it, though, you might be surprised just how dramatic, like how superheroed they can be. The stories I'm going to read tonight are relatively tame in that direction, but in the past I've read one. I remember there was one I read that had O'Shawn, who is also a major figure of Irish lore, staying in St. Patrick's house, and St. Patrick's is put in the role of being an adjudicator about whether he was being he wasn't staying in St. Patrick's house, he was staying in a fellow's house, and they went to St. Patrick's to adjudicate whether O'Shawn was getting enough food. And of course, O'Shawn being of like heroic stature shows that he can eat an entire forest's worth of hunting. And St. Patrick sort of rules in his favor that he wasn't being properly cared for while he was sick or whatever it was. For the life of me, I would have read that story again actually tonight, but for the life of me, I could not remember what book I read it in. It's been too many years. So, yeah, as far as figures of lore, saints being kind of magical or powerful in some way is not unique to St. Patrick. In fact, I am going to read you a second Irish saint story near the end here that will just sort of, just to demonstrate this isn't that unusual. Saints had a kind of superhero status in a lot of folklore, and that's kind of what we're going to look at. Something I do want to emphasize before I go into this is that there's no real reason to believe that any of this happened. I mean, I think that needs to be the thing to do. I think that's the that doesn't need to be done, I should say, about folklore. Everyone goes, of course folklore is not real in the same sense, but it always gets a little sticky when St. Patrick was by all measures a real person, probably lived in the 5th century. And was the person who is credited for bringing Christianity to Ireland. You know, there is some evidence that that may not be the case. And there are some rather famous pieces of folklore around it that you could probably name. Like, one is using the 3-leaf clover to talk about the Trinity. The other, I think probably most famous one, the one I've heard when I was young as well, was that he scared all the snakes out of Ireland. You know, these kinds of things. We're not going to read any of those stories. We will see some snakes come up because that's a part of just his cycle, I suppose. But yeah. So the idea that saints are spectacular is a normal thing. We're going to read some stories that say St. Patrick did these things. This is not a historical document. I'm not a historian. This is a collection of folklore, and what we're really looking at is how people who knew this name, this real person who was supposedly quite blessed by God, the many great feats he did. That said, they may be based more in truth than you think. Like, folklore does, when we are able to sort of track written records along oral traditions, you'd be surprised how much it's not a game of telephone, and there is some accuracy to it. Second thing I need to say before we start, sorry for all the blabbing. Reminder, if you're not watching this live, you can click in the description below, start the stories. A word on pronunciation. Irish folklore is particularly tough to find guides for pronunciation, and there are a few reasons for that. Some to do, obviously, with the oppression of Irish people and their culture and history. Whenever you have that kind of history, it becomes, you know, diminished and hard to find resources about especially the generations that were affected by oppression like that. The other is a more logistical issue, like the fact that Old Irish did not have standardized spelling for a good deal of history, which is true of a lot of languages, by the way. That's nothing particularly unique. But when a language without a standardized spelling or sorry, I should say, when a language is without a standardized spelling, it means that when it's in a work from that era where it wasn't really standardized, and I try to search for it online in the now standardized language, sometimes I can't find it because it's just been spelled differently. And so there's the logistical issue of just finding the right word and knowing that that's the right word. So to that end, I guess my first thing I would say is that if you speak Irish or you have a pretty good understanding of that, this might not be a good stream for you. It's pretty frustrating to hear somebody stumble or mispronounce words you know how to pronounce. But I also want to thank this video I found on YouTube. They were called the Irish Pagan School. They don't know me, I don't know them. I don't know if we have anything in common. All I'm going to say is that they have an entire video, 15-minute video, on pronouncing old Irish language terms around fairies. and it's like the only one I've ever found that was like that. So they didn't cover a lot of the terms that I was looking for, but they covered enough that in some cases I could kind of work backwards to what is probably a more accurate pronunciation than before. Which is to say, well, I doubt I'm impressing anyone. In fact, I know I won't be. I'm hoping that some of these old Irish language pronunciations are closer to what they would have been than what I would have been without that said video. So, Cole's notes, not unusual at all. This St. Patrick's thing, the idea that a saint can do special or magical things is really common in folklore across different cultures. It's quite common, though, in Celtic and particular Irish traditions. But we're going to focus a little bit on St. Patrick's, and then we'll also see another example just so you can see that this comes up a lot. And then finally, not the greatest at pronouncing Old Irish. Hard to find guides to pronounce Old Irish. So if you know it, I envy you. That's enough talking from me. This is Ireland, so we're going to need a light rain and maybe a bit of wind off the ocean. So I've picked kind of the more subtle and tame ones here, because I have read some of the wilder ones. But with that said, they're still kind of weird and wild, considering that this is supposed to be a saint. Oh yeah, one last thing. The name of this book, Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland, is a book by Lady Wilde. Now you might think, Lady Wilde, is that Oscar Wilde's wife? I didn't know he had a wife or whatever else. It's not. It's his mother. So this book was a collection of Irish folklore by Oscar Wilde's mother. And you should know, she was a pretty vehement nationalist. Which maybe doesn't carry the baggage that it does now. That's not why I'm saying it. I'm just saying it as we read these stories. Just know there is that undercurrent to it. The first story of St. Patrick tonight, on St. Patrick's Day, comes to us from Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland, collected by Lady Wilde, Oscar Wilde's mother. And the title of our first little passage of these superstitions about St. Patrick is called St. Patrick. Many saints in old times used to come and take up their abode in the innumerable evidences of their presence. And innumerable evidences of their presence still remain in the ancient ruins of the so-called cells or churches built in the rudest form, but always placed in a picturesque locality beside a well, which ever since has been held sacred, and no woman is allowed to wash her feet in the water. In one of these islands is a stone bed called the Bed of the Holy Ghost, and many people go from the mainland to lie a night in this bed, though the sea is always rough and dangerous, believing that it heals all disease, and it brings good luck to all, and to woman of blessing of children, the blessing of children. If the lark sings on St. Bridget's Day, it is a good omen, and a sign of fine weather, and whoever hears it for the first thing in the morning will have good luck in all he does for that whole day. St. Bridget was granted by the Lord to have every second Sunday fine, so that she might preach to the converts that came to her. Then St. Patrick greatly desired that his day should also be fine, so that people might gather in remembrance of him, and this was also granted. So, from that time forth, the Saint's Day, the 17th of March, is always fine, for so it was decreed from the ancient times when he was upon earth, I say, as I look out at the rain splattering against my window. On St. Patrick's Day, it is the usage in the islands to affix large crosses made of straw and flowers on the doorposts, and a black cock is sacrificed in honor of the saint, though no one can tell why it is considered necessary that blood should be spilt. Except that the idea of sacrifice is found in all religions and rituals of worship. At first, the object most loved or most prized was sacrificed. A child, or a costly jewel. Then the human sacrifice began to be replaced by the offering of an animal, who was made the medium of expiation. And the god was satisfied, so that blood was spilled to purify from sin. It is remarkable that relics of this ancient ritual of sacrifice can still be found in the enlightened households of this advanced 19th century. And an ox is still slaughtered at Christmas, though Baal is forgotten, and a lamb is sacrificed at Easter, as the Druids offered the firstlings of the flock to the sun god, while a goose is slain on St. Michael's Day as a burnt offering to the saint. Which is a novel way to look at, like, feasting. I don't really think there's a lot of, like, historical connection there, but maybe you agree. I think she might be being a little fanciful. Lizzie Rose says, I fancy that saints took the place of heroes in Christianized places. And GS agrees, saying that saints were like the Marvel superheroes of the day. I would say that there's a lot of comparison there. In terms of like their characterization, they often remind me a bit more of like Gandalf. But I do think that there's a meaningful comparison to be made. Oh, hello, Mr. Kitpelt. Good to see you again. All right. Carrying on then. So, what we just read was a sort of description of some of the rituals that maintain around it, and it certainly does make it hard to, like, shake the accusation that saints are taking the place of pagan gods here, because, you know, even Lady Wild here is admitting that this ritual seems more pagan than it does Christian. We will see in the last story that we read, which will be a different saint, another saint where they spill blood on his day. But the reason for it is insane. It's not left as open as this one. But that'll come later. Our next tale about St. Patrick's is the Well of the Book. When St. Patrick was one time amongst the pagan Irish, they grew very fierce, and they seemed eager to kill him. Then his life being in great danger, he kneeled down before them, prayed to God for help and for the conversion of their souls. And the fervor of the prayer was so great that as the saint rose up, the mark of his knees was left deep in the stone. And when the people saw the miracle, they believed. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be dismissive, but it is very funny that what sold them on all of this wasn't the emotion or the power or whatever of God. It was that his knees made a hole. Now when he came to the next village, the people said if he performed some wonder for them, they also would believe and pray to his God. So St. Patrick drew a great circle in the ground and bade them to stand outside it. And then he prayed, and lo, the water rushed up from the earth, and a well pure and bright as crystal filled the circle, and the people believed and were baptized. Now you see, that's a proper miracle. None of this needed stuff. The well can be seen this day and is called Toba Nolara, the Well of the Book, because St. Patrick placed his own prayer book in the center of the circle before the water rose. Yeah, I didn't think to look that up. That is a bad one on me, but I'm curious if that's just a naturally occurring feature, because that would be another example of folklore explaining geographic features, a thing that we were talking about, I think, last week. And this one should be no surprise, because one of the things you will find often associated to St. Patrick is something to do with snakes. Our next tale is called St. Patrick and the Serpent, and it also comes to us from Lady Wilde's Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland. There is a lake in one of the Galtee Mountains where there is a great serpent chained to the rock, and he may be heard constantly crying out, "Oh, Patrick, is the Lewin or Monday long from us?" For when St. Patrick cast the serpent into the lake, he bade him be chained to this rock till La'an Lewin, the day of judgment. Unfortunately, the serpent mistook the word and thought the saint meant Lewin, Monday. So he still expects to be freed from one Monday to another, and the clanking of his chains on that day is awful to hear as he strives to break them and get free. In another lake, there is a huge winged creature, it is said, which escaped the power of St. Patrick, and when he gambols in the water, such storms arise that no boat can withstand the tumult of the waves. One of my favorite things about folklore collections is you never know what that last paragraph's going to be. Like, very often it's just sort of a conclusion to the story, but sometimes it's like they just got distracted and then they write something else. Our next tale of St. Patrick is called St. Patrick and the Princesses, and it comes to us again from Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland by Lady Wilde. One day, the two daughters of the King of Meath, named Etna and Fadalma, went down to the river to bathe, and there they beheld St. Patrick and his band of converts all draped in white roses, for they were celebrating morning prayers. And the princesses, seeing strange men in white garments, thought they were of the race of the male fairies, the Divination. And they questioned them. Then St. Patrick expounded the truth to them, and the maidens asked him many questions. "Who is your god? Is he handsome? Are his daughters as handsome as we are? Is he rich? Is he young or aged? Is he to die? Or does he live forever?" And now St. Patrick, having satisfied them all on these points, the maidens, Etna and Fadalma, were baptized and became zealous workers for the Christian cause. I also really like the everyone clapped vibe that all the St. Patrick's legends have. Well, somebody came along and was like, "Surely your god's a weakling," and then he cracked the ground and you went, "Oh, wow, your god's the best." Like, it really has that, like, that over-boastful Reddit vibe at times. Yeah. I'm glad Lizzie Rose picked up on that. Is your god handsome? Oh, is he a good-looking man? It's not a very charitable view of them. All right. The next one is called The Poison Cup, and it also comes to us from Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland by Lady Wilde. St. Patrick went on to Tara, and there he lit the Paschal fire and celebrated the Easter mysteries. But the Druids were wroth, For it was against their ordinances for any fire to be lit until the chief druid himself had kindled the sacred fire, and therefore they sought to poison St. Patrick, and a cup full of poison was given him by one of the druids. But the danger was revealed to him, and thereupon he pronounced certain words over the liquor, and whoever pronounceth these words over poison shall receive no injury from it. He also then composed the prayer in nomine de Patris and recited it over the cup of poison. Seems like it would have been helpful to provide those words. That would be my one criticism to this tradition. Maybe next time remember the magic words that make poison not work. All right. Now, the next section of about 4 stories requires a little bit of context. We're going to see a story where St. Patrick is mentioned, and then we're going to see 2 stories where he's not basically mentioned, and then a 4th story where he is. They're bundled together because they concern the same process, and I think the point of bundling them the way they have is to sort of explain why St. Patrick reaches the conclusion he reaches in the 4th story. Uncle Kitty says, I wonder if this means she can't get drunk. Maybe. So there will be 2 stories in here where you'll be like, I thought we were talking about St. Patrick's. No worry. It's all about him eventually. Okay. I guess just a little bit more context, although the stories also give you this context a bit. I need you to sort of forget a certain version of bards for a moment. It's not wrong to think of a bard as like a traveling musician, because they were. But bards were a bit more than that. You need to understand that the value of like a story and music was not purely entertainment in history. That it was a measure, and I would argue still now, but even more so today, we kind of delineate that stuff away from like textbooks and things like that. But bards were kind of all of that. Bards in many ways were like the first like college kids, I guess. They were the people who knew the stories, and those stories were presumed to be true, or at least have truth about them. They knew about the gods, and they knew about these rituals, and they were knowers of things. Now I'm painting with a broad brush. Bards' traditions are very across the world. But I wanted to mention that because we're going to see some stuff here that we don't associate with bards. And I don't want you to get too thrown off by that. That's not that weird. Bards did a lot of things historically more than we remember them in pop culture for. So this next little suite of stories is about St. Patrick's St. Patrick's interactions with the bards. Our next tale is about St. Patrick and the bards, as will a few of these tales be, and it comes to us again from Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland by Lady Wilde. Our first selection here is called Divination. In ancient pagan times in Ireland, the poets were supposed to possess a gift of prophecy, and by certain means could throw themselves into a state which they had lucid visions of coming events. This state, called Imms of an Osna, was produced by incantations and the offering of the flesh of a red pig, a dog, or a cat to their idols. Then the poet, laying the 2 palms of his hands on his cheek, lay down and slept. his idol gods beside him, and when he awoke he could see all things and foretell all things. He could make verses with the ends of his fingers and repeat the same without studying, and in this way proved his right to be chief poet at the court of the king. Also, he laid his staff upon the head of a person, and thus he found out his name, the name of his father and mother, and all unknown things that were proposed to him. And this prophetic power was also obtained by Imbus for Osna through a different kind of offering, though a different kind of offering was made to the idol. But Patrick abolished these practices and declared that whoever used them should enjoy neither heaven nor earth, and he substituted for them the chorus curda, the law of poetry, in which no offering was made to demons, for the profession of the poet, he said, was pure and should not be subject to the power of the devil. He left to the poets, however, the gift of extemporaneous recital, because it was acquired through great knowledge and diligent study, but all other rights he strictly forbade to the poets of Erin. So, just a little bit of clarity here, just to be fair to the history of this, not to take sides, but obviously the people who were doing these prophecies did not see themselves as talking to demons or devils. The author is taking very much St. Patrick's view here, that any other god is the work of the devil, which was a popular view for most of history in Christian areas. But and it certainly was how missionaries and such presented it to a lot of places they went, though not exclusively, as we can see evidenced in a lot of works where Christ is put alongside things like Thor. Yeah, so we get this idea that, you know, St. Patrick witnesses these rituals, sees them as unholy, and bans most of them, though is willing to still allow basically historical and performative stuff. And there's an interesting justification here, which is they worked for it, that like they had to memorize it, they had to they had to sort of imbue it in themselves. He didn't like that they were gaining knowledge without working for it, because that to him betrayed that it was coming from, you know, the devil and whatnot. And that's an interesting take. I don't know how much that's Lady Wild's own sort of insertion, or how much that is a part of the ethos of St. Patrick in these tales, but I've not heard that one before. Carrying on then with the poets, we're going to see a couple of stories of poets, and then we'll have one more of poets with St. Patrick. Our next tale doesn't really strictly focus much on St. Patrick, but it relates to the last one. It is called The Blind Poet, and it comes to us from the same book by Lady Wild. As a proof of the magnetic, lucid vision obtained by the great Olms of poetry, it is recorded of the blind poet Luadal that his attendants, having brought him the skull of an animal found upon the strand, they asked him to declare its history, and thereupon, placing the end of his wand upon the skull, he beheld with the inner visions, and said, "Tempestuous waters have destroyed Breccan, and this is the skull of his lapdog, but little greatness now remains, for the Breccan and his people have perished in the waves." And this was divination by the staff, a power possessed only by the chief poets, and by none else. Our next tale is also a part of this sequence of bardic poets and under the time of St. Patrick. This one is called The Story of Breccan. The story of Breccan is related in Cormac's glossary. He was a merchant who traded between Ireland and Scotland with 50 coracles, And now there was a great whirlpool at Rathlin Island, caused by this meeting of the seas, and they formed a cauldron vast enough to swallow all Ireland. And it happened on a time that Breccan and all his caracals were lost and engulfed in this cauldron. Not a man was left to tell the tale of how they had perished, and thus it was the skull of a small animal being discovered on the beach. It was brought to the blind poet, who, laying his staff on it, obtained the inner vision, by which he revealed the fate of Breccan and his 50 caracals. So we see the same story there told from two directions, which is interesting. You don't see that too often in folklore. Interesting to me, I should say. I must always leave room for the audience to be dreadfully bored. And our last tale, not of the night, but our last tale of St. Patrick, and our last tale about St. Patrick and the poets, is called Bardic Privileges. Comes to us from the same book by Lady Wilde. Now St. Patrick left the poets all their rights of divination by wisdom, and all their ancient rights over storytelling with the music of the harp, 350 stories being allowed to the chief poet. He also secured just judgments for their professional rights, so that if land was mentioned in their songs, having been walled and trenched by them, that was considered to be sufficient legal evidence of title to the soil. But what they received of St. Patrick was better, he affirmed, than all the evil rites to devils which they had abandoned, along with the profane practice of magic by the two palms called imbus for osna, by which lucid vision and the spirit of prophecy was supposed to come on them after invocations to idols and demons, all of which evil practices St. Patrick abolished, but left the poets the skilled hand in music and the fluent tongue in recitation, for which none can equal the bards of Ireland throughout all the world. It's an interesting take to me that this guy comes along and tells the poets they can't do most of the things they used to do, but is otherwise granted, St. Patrick's is otherwise kind of granted, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Granted, like, the status of being the one who, like, nurtured Ireland's bards. I guess the idea is that he kind of focused them in on their skills and they stopped doing all the scary ritual stuff. But it's just odd because the only contribution he's had so far is just telling them not to do things. But he gets all this credit. Maybe others will have other takes. This isn't really a story, but I will read it. It's sort of the ending of the section on it, and it gives a few details, a few more pieces of mythos. The Ogham writing on the poet's staff is mentioned in very old manuscripts as in use in the pagan period before St. Patrick's time, though no specimen of Ogham writing has yet been found of earlier date than the Christian era. St. Patrick introduced Latin and the Latin letters, which superseded Ogham, and after his time, Latin was taught very generally in the Irish schools. St. Patrick was also confirmed as right and proper for observance, whatever was just in the Breccan laws, so as it was not at variance with the law of Christ, for the people had been guided by the Breccan laws from all antiquity, and it was not easy to overthrow them. Besides, many or most of them were framed with strict regard to justice and morality. When St. Patrick was dying, an angel of the Lord was sent to him, who announced to the great and holy saint that God had granted this favor to his prayers, namely that his jurisdiction over the church was ordained to be ever at Armagh. and that Patrick and the Apostle of Ireland should be the judge of all the Irish at the last day, and none other according to the promise made to the other apostles. Ye shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the tribes of Israel. Now, I'd never heard the idea that St. Patrick's was on judge duty for all the Irish, but I thought that was worth sharing. It's not really a story, it's just sort of little facts. Not even facts, I'm sure. I see Jumpstore is here after a nap. Good to see you, Jumpstore. All right. We're going to finish out by reading about not St. Patrick's. We're going to be reading about St. Martin. St. Martin's Day, obviously not as famous as St. Patrick's Day at this point, but St. Martin is still a very famous saint. I chose to read this one to kind of demonstrate that St. Patrick is not unique in the canon of folklore. In fact, there was a brief mention back there of St. Bridget. She has her own stories. There's a St. Kieran, there's a St. Kevin, there's a few other saints. And I mentioned there's saints in Iceland, there's some saint stories in Norway, there's some saint stories in Germany that we've read before. I could do even more on saints if I needed to, but I like the St. Martin one. It's a little more meaty of a story than we've been reading so far, and also I just wanted to show that, like, St. Patrick is the one we seem to have remembered the most in our broad culture for whatever set of influences and reasons that cause that, but it's not unique to have this sort of deification or superheroification, if you will, of a saint. Our final story of the night is not about St. Patrick, it's about St. Martin, but it shows us a good example of a saint story of another saint. It comes to us from Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland by Lady Wilde, and it's called St. Martin. St. Martin was a bad man, before his conversion, anyways, and above all was exceedingly closed-fisted, as they say, to the poor, giving nothing and grasping all. So he was very rich, but hated by everyone. And one day, when he was going out, he charged the servant to have a fine batch of loaves ready-made and baked by the time he returned. While she was kneading the dough, in came a poor man and begged for some, as he was hungry. But she told him she dare not give away anything, or the master would beat her. Still the poor man begged the harder, and at last she gave him dough enough for a couple of loaves. However, when the girl's back was turned, this man threw the dough into the oven and went his way without a word. Now when the dough was ready, the girl opened the oven to put in the loaves, but behold, it was already quite full of baked bread, and would hold no more. And so when Martin came home, she told him all the truth, and his heart smote him. He cried out, "An angel of the Lord has been here. God has sent him his messenger to rebuke me of my sins." And he ran out to search for the man along the road, and at last he saw him a great way off. And then Martin flung off his coat, that he might run faster. And when he came up to the man, he fell on his knees before him on the ground, and cried out, "Oh, my Lord, I repent me of my sins. Pray to God for me, for I know you are his angel." And from that moment Martin's heart was changed, and the devil left him, and he became a true saint and servant of God, and above all, the saint and patron of the poor. Nevertheless, St. Bridget was offended with St. Martin because she thought he did not receive her with sufficient hospitality and consideration. Perhaps some of the old stinginess of nature still clung to him, and thus she pronounced her malediction over him. "O little man, the sea wave shall come up over thy house, and thy name shall lie in ashes, while my name and fame shall be glorious all over the world." And this was fulfilled, for the sea actually broke in and covered the saint's dwelling, and the house of St. Martin can still be seen low down beneath the waves. But if anyone tries to reach it, the house fades away into mist and is seen no more. There is an old superstition still observed by the people, that blood must be spilt on St. Martin's Day. So a goose is killed or a black cock, and the blood is sprinkled over the floor and on the threshold, and of some of the flesh is given to the first beggar that comes by, in the name and in honor of St. Martin. Now put on your seatbelts, because you're not prepared for why this is happening. You're not prepared for this next paragraph. The whiplash of it. In the Aran Isles, St. Martin's Day is observed with particular solemnity, and it was held necessary from ancient times to spill blood on the ground in honor of the saint. For this purpose a cock was sacrificed, but if such could not be procured, people have been known to cut their finger in order to draw blood and let it fall upon the earth. The custom arose in this way. St. Martin, having given away all his goods to the poor, was often in want of food, and one day he entered a widow's house, and he begged for something to eat. Oh, but the widow was poor, having no food in the house, so she sacrificed her young child, boiled it, and set it before the saint for supper. Having eaten a child and taken his departure, the woman went over to the cradle to weep for her lost child, when lo, there he was, lying whole and well in a beautiful sleep, as if no evil had ever happened to him. And to commemorate this miracle, and from gratitude to the saint, a sacrifice of some living thing is made yearly in his honor. The blood is poured or sprinkled on the ground and along the doorposts, and both within and without the threshold, and at the four corners of each room in the house. What? What is the moral of that? For this symbol of purification by blood, the rich farmers sacrifice a sheep, while the poorer people kill a black cock or a white hen and sprinkle the blood according to ancient usage. Afterwards, the whole family dine upon the sacrificial victim. In some places, it was the custom for the master of the house to draw a cross on the arm of each member of the family and mark it out in blood. This was a very sacred sign which no fairy or evil spirit, were they ever so strong, could overcome. Whoever was signed with the blood was safe. And there is a singular superstition forbidding work of a certain kind to be done on St. Martin's Day, the 11th of November. No woman should be spin on that day, no miller should grind his corn, and no wheel should be turned. And this custom was long held sacred and is still observed in the Western Islands. I can tell that this was made in the 19th century. Because that's not what the 11th of November is to us these days. Yeah, I see the chat has caught up to this. Lizzie Rose says the poor woman did what now? With 5 question marks. I know. Oh. I thought about this. I read these stories and I went for a walk, because I go for a lot of walks. I thought about this story for like an hour. We don't have time. We don't have time to just listen to me piece apart the logic of this, the implications of this. Because, to be clear, it's not lost on me the supposed point. The supposed point is that you should give everything you have in the name of, Christ to whoever is needy. That's Christ's call. Take care of the needy. He has his lines about he who does not turn their back on their families and whatever in my name is not welcome at my table, and there's all this very extreme ascetic kind of lifestyle stuff. But are we really saying that if you're out of food because you're poor and a dude needs to eat, that you're supposed to, like, cook your kid and hope Jesus will give him back? That's the story that made it, like, 1700 years? That's the moral? I'm sorry. It blows my mind. Jumpstore says I actually made some brownies with crushed up bits of Oreo-esque cookies in it. Absolutely delicious. They sure sound like it. Uncle Kitty's like, I'm thinking the Fae were more like you people have issues for sure. Lizzie Rose says, to be fair, the sacrifice and blood sprinkling is reminiscent of Jewish Passover, for sure. God had them kill a lamb, sprinkle its blood around their door so the angel of death would pass them by. Tied to a rather famous tale as well. Like, it's certainly not unusual to have animal sacrifices and using their blood to ward stuff off. I'm not really sure where it starts from. I think that'd be interesting because it seems like if you have a kind of materialist conception of the world, which I tend to, I must admit, you think, okay, people in caves, what would smearing blood do but attract problems, right? So where does that start? Like, I feel like a lot of these rituals must have had some kind of perceived benefit beyond just imagination. It's a weird one. And also, before anybody says it, because I'm sure if anybody feels so motivated, I might see it in the comments or something. I am aware of the story of, is it Job? I think, who was going to sacrifice his son, and then God intervenes. I'm aware that they are kind of pulling an analogy here. But Job doesn't chop his son up. And then also finds him sitting down at the bottom of the hill, and he's like, ooh, my limbs work now. I will never get over this. I will never get over the idea that the moral thing to do in this tale is to cook your own child. Abraham, thank you. Thank you, GS. Job was the one who suffered, right? This is not really a testament to me not knowing Bible stories, by the way. This is, again, a testament to my incapacity to recall names. Uncle Kitty says, it's not a protective charm so much as how nature says do not touch. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Does blood deter things, though? Because I feel like blood attracts stuff. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyways. The larger point being here, St. Patrick, one of many legends of folklore who have the saint status. There are, like I said, other tales that I've read in the past. I wish I knew what video it was. Professional videographers and YouTubers might have that linked right here. But if anything is clear, I'm not very professional. Yeah. Jumpstore says anything can be a charm if you believe it is. Just ask any con man. I think that's a fair point as well. Yeah. Honestly, I'm still trying to get over it. Like, I thought reading it again, it might make more sense, but it blows my mind. Which is wild, because the things I've read on this channel, some of them are pretty twisted and crazy, but that's the one that I just did not see it coming. It was like a car slammed into the side of me, and then I was at the side of the road, staring at my smoke coming out of the hood of the car. That was my brain. Oh yeah, I was going to mention the story about when I had strep throat. So I used to travel around and teach stuff. And I I guess I got it when I was on the plane to where I was teaching. And I had a sore throat. But for whatever reason, I was convinced that's all it was. I don't know why I was so stubborn about this, because this really is not my nature. But so I'm just like in a hotel in the middle of nowhere. This is not a glamorous thing. This is like a working class place. In a hotel, and I would walk across the street and go and teach this class 8 hours, which is tough to do when you have strep throat. And then I would come back. And I just started to feel worse and worse. It hurt so bad that I was struggling to sleep. And of course, you start getting these crazy dreams and fevers and whatever. And I had to teach for 5 days. I made it 3.5 days until in the middle of teaching, I just looked down at my notes and I didn't really know what they said. And I was like, I'm sorry. Can everybody find something else to do for 2 hours? I need to take a cab to a clinic. And then when I went there, he was like, yeah, you have significant strep throat. And one thing I'll say, when I took because I had to come back and teach, we couldn't do another day. That's one of the things with teaching. I had to make up the time anyways. When I took the antibiotics, it almost immediately helped, which I guess I'd never really appreciated because I'd never been in such a situation where I was so infected. But when I took it, like within an hour, I felt better. So antibiotics, miracles. That was the one time I got strep throat, I think from recirculated air on a plane. GS says you have to read St. Bridget now. You're reading the thing about the cow? Yeah. We can see the first line and are curious. And Jumpstore concurs. If anybody is just listening, I'll read the opening 2 lines that they can see, but that's all I'm going to read for now. At one time, a certain leopard came to St. Bridget to beg a cow from her. Which would you prefer, said Holy Bridget, to be healed of your disease or to have the cow? If I was a doctor, that's how I would open every appointment till I had no patience. All right, well, I've got a rambling brain today, so the best thing I could do is log off. I hope you folks enjoyed the stories. They weren't the wackiest and wildest saint stories we have, and I specifically wanted to pick the odd ones for this. There are so many St. Patrick stories out there, though, if you know where to look, including some more on this channel. You'll just have to watch every video and you'll find them. Does that work as an engagement strategy? But thank you very much, Jumpstore, Lizzie Rose, Uncle Kitty, Kitten Pelt, and Tammy for dropping in, saying hello, keeping me company while I read these stories. If you are Irish or otherwise celebrate St. Patrick's Day, I hope that you have a good one. Obviously, St. Patrick's Day means a lot of things, not just about the saint. It has a lot of, connections it's built over the years. Uncle Kitty said, I hadn't heard the one before, so that was definitely most worth it, Rory. Yes. Yeah. I will be back here next week reading more stories. Maybe about saints, because now everybody wants me to read the saints stories. I don't know if I can get away with 2 weeks of saints. GS says, wacky myth, you have to wear green so the leprechauns can't see you, but it's an American story. Well, that's interesting. It's like American folklore. It's a fun one. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Sometimes I'll see like people talking about stories like that, and they'll say, well, that's not the real story. Honey, none of them are the real story. It's all folklore, baby. It doesn't get special status just because it's older than this one. That's a charming one. Anyhow, that'll be it for me. So, as always, I will keep the fire warm. You folks have yourself a good sleep.